Hey guys, I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. On this day last year, New York and New Jersey were getting wrecked by Superstorm Hurricane Sandy. Overall, the storm cost the cities $65 billion and took months of cleanup efforts. No doubt it was a devastating storm, but as we look back 1 year later, what have we learned? Well, the next time a storm this size hits, we do know that the subway system will probably be shut down again due to massive flooding. Keep in mind there are still hundreds of people living out of hotels because they don't have a home to return to. And sure, Congress eventually agreed to send $51 billion in relief to the victims of Sandy, but we don't know where that money went. According to the National Center for Disaster Preparedness, only 23% has been dispersed to the agencies directly involved in relief efforts, and only 15% of that has actually reached the hands of the victims. But a lack in financial aid isn't the only glaring problem here. Those who were fortunate enough to rebuild post-Sandy are doing so in locations that are red zones for flooding-related disasters in the future. Basically, they're setting themselves up for disaster all over again. Which brings us to the elephant in the room. And no, I'm not talking about Chris Christie. I'm talking about climate change. Half of the politicians out there want to stick their heads in the sand and keep denying the obvious fact that climate change isn't only real, it's already happening. And thanks to sea levels rising at an alarming rate, we'll be sure to see some Hurricane Sandy-style flooding or worse much more frequently, according to a recent NOAA report. Meanwhile, our do-nothing Congress wants to do nothing about climate change or carbon emission problems, while the country they're representing continues to suck up 25% of the world's energy. And until we all wake up and acknowledge the serious problems on the horizon, disasters like Sandy could become the norm.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait. Do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire with tone. These words are hard hitting, you're watching your neck, but you need to tune in because we're breaking the set. Breaking the set. Breaking the set.
Monsanto has made its presence known in nearly every corner of the world, from Europe to Australia. This ag giant has attempted to force its genetic modified seeds and pesticides across the planet, one continent at a time. Except for one, Africa. But that's quickly changing. Monolithic industries like DuPont, Syngenta, and Monsanto are moving in and threatening to destroy traditional farming practices. That's why 7 African countries, including Ghana, participated in a Stop Monsanto march back in May. See, despite this company's claims that they're increasing crop yields and helping to combat poverty and hunger, local farmers say that's far from the truth. Earlier, I spoke to a representative from one of the leading African organizations fighting this food takeover, Food Sovereignty Ghana. His name is Ali Masmadi, and I started by asking him why Monsanto's only now making the push into Africa.
Monsanto has withdrawn from further applications in the European market, in the European Union, based on the, rejection by the civil society, and also on the basis of non-acceptance on scientific grounds. We also have seen a broad popular surge against the GMOs in Latin America. Brazil, the farmers have sued Monsanto. In Argentina, there are so many problems associated with health. In India, they have, recently ruled at the Supreme Court. A technical committee of experts have called for imposed an indefinite moratorium. In fact, before there was a 10-year moratorium, it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, the technical committee, based on very serious scientific evidence, committee of experts decided that there should be an indefinite moratorium. So it looks like it's only Africa that is left for them.
And you've compared the entry of GMOs into Africa to a new wave of colonialism. Why?
Well, I mean, if it were just a matter of a new wave of colonialism, probably we would have accepted that. It is worse than that. It is even worse than slavery. And here is why. Dr. Henry Kissinger once said, food is a weapon. Whoever controls the food controls the population. And I think this is what we are seeing in Africa. They want our resources. They want not only the food, it is access to everything that they need and want in Africa. They don't want Africa to stand in the way. So if they can starve us to death or make us succumb to whatever demands they are imposing on Africa, the best way to do that is through the control of our food.
And let's zero in on Ghana, which of course is what your focus is right now, these giant ag corporations moving in. Talk specifically about what you're concerned about as it relates to small farmers and the food buying public.
Oh yeah, okay. In fact, at the moment, they have what they call a Biosafety Act put in place. And that Biosafety Act calls for a biosafety authority. And here we are in a situation where we have the same promoters of GMO sitting on the biosafety committee to regulate the GMO crops. And what do you call it? That means very soon we are going to have, what do you call it? Another law coming to also. It's called the UPOF Compliance Law, Plant Variety Bill. It's before Parliament now. It has already gone through the first reading. And by the end of November, it will be going through the second and the third reading. In fact, they are in a hurry to impose the Plant Breeders Bill on Ghanaians. And this automatically gives a monopoly to the 6 chemical biotechnology companies, Sanjeta, Monsanto, BASF, and others, to have unfettered access to Ghana.
If this will indeed destroy local agriculture in Ghana, why do you think the Ghanaian government is moving forward with it?
So what we have today is that the government is in competition with the most rabid elements of our political class to accept whatever is tossed to Ghanaians, to Ghana, so that they cannot be undermined, or they can also be accepted by the international community.
And Ollie, many people believe that GMOs produce more yields to withstand droughts, floods, etc., and that they're good for sustainability in developing countries. Do you disagree with these alleged benefits, and what other health things should we be concerned about with these foods?
There's a big dichotomy. If you look at the GMO issue very well, there's a big dichotomy between promise and performance. The promise is that we must be climate change ready. It will reduce the use of pesticide. It will increase yield. When you look at the, the use of pesticides, there are a lot of, in America, North America, and India and other places where they have tried this. Even there is an increase in the use of pesticides because the GM crops, they develop super bugs, super weeds, which require even more toxic chemicals to deal with. So in fact, it leads to much more use of insecticides and pesticides than the normal crops because they don't have these super weeds and those problems associated with it to the levels that we see with the GM crops. Again, in terms of yield, the yield of GM crops have been seen to be probably because of the way they are controlled in the first few years. But then after at least 3 years, in Burkina Faso, the BT cotton, there was a sharp decline after the 4th year. And today, we have less than 60% of people using it than, previously.
Is there there a middle ground to be found? I mean, would your organization support the introduction of GMO crops if there was proper regulation and mandatory testing and the labeling of GMOs?
Well, our bottom line is that we want to eat good food. We are not there just like guinea pigs for multinational corporations to experiment with us, and we don't have to complain and eat whatever they give to us and find out later if everything is all right. That is not, and what do you call it? In fact, the GM technology itself is almost becoming obsolete today. We know that the mechanical identification of a gene that confers certain properties for the plant is not correct, and that it is a family of genes that work in a harmonious way to produce the beneficial effects. There are several other ways in agroecology that doesn't require genetic modification and that can use traditional breeding and selection to produce even much more effective and much more powerful seeds than what we get from GMO. So in fact, we don't even need it.
Taking ownership over our food, over our lives, over our communities. Thank you so much for breaking this down, for speaking out against this issue. Ali Masmadi, Chairperson, Food Sovereignty Ghana, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much, Abby.
After the break, one of America's staunch allies has a horrific track record when it comes to human rights abuses. We'll tell you who it is when we return.
5 seconds. And over the mic is all feeling go.
Did you know the press is the only industry specifically mentioned in the Constitution?
Stand by.
That's because a free and open press is critical to our democracy.
Track alpha. Roll alpha.
In fact, the single biggest threat facing our nation today is the corporate takeover of our government and our press.
Stand by, camera one.
We've been hijacked by a handful of powerful transnational corporations that will profit by destroying what our founding fathers once built up. I'm Tom Hartman, and on this show, we reveal the big picture of what's actually going on in the world. We go beyond identifying the problem.
We try to fix it.
Rational debate and a real discussion of the critical issues facing America.
Stand by on camera, go.
Ready to join the movement? Then welcome to the big picture.
I'm the resident, and I'm sick of society sucking. I'm sick of corporations trying to convince us to consume, consume, consume. I'm sick of bankers trying to convince us all that life is all about money. And I'm especially sick of our politicians writing the laws and regulations to protect corporations and bankers while they hang us out to dry. There is just too much crap in today's society. Let's talk about that.
As much as we hear this government preaching about human rights abuses in Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan, there's one Middle Eastern country that continues to be omitted from the discussion. And it just so happens to be one of America's closest allies in the region, Saudi Arabia. You see, this country governs under strict Sharia law, the strictest interpretation of Islam, and is perhaps the world's most oppressive patriarchy. Unlike other U.S. allies, such as Qatar, that puts up the guise of progressivism, Saudi Arabia is unabashedly repressive when it comes to women. Believe it or not, it's the only country in the world that forbids women from driving a vehicle. But before you start judging poor little Saudi Arabia, there's a very good reason why. Just check out what one Saudi cleric had to say on the matter.
سينشغل منها الذهن والفكر والعقل وحينما تجلس طويل الحوض يرتد وعن طريق الارتداد يحصل ضغط على المبايض.
Oh, so it's not PMS, it's just that I've been driving too much. Thanks, Mr. Cleric, for clearing that up. All kidding aside, though, this outrageous discriminatory policy has sparked a protest among Saudi women. For the second time in just 3 years, dozens of Saudis have taken to their cars and proudly driven through the streets of Riyadh. But as shocking as the forbidden practice may sound to Western ears, this ban on women driving actually has no legal basis in the country. It's just part of a larger system of customs meant to ensure that women stay in line and are obedient servants to their male counterparts.
How not to get punished for being a woman. The first thing you need to understand is, as a woman, you are the property of a man, either your father, brother, or your husband. This man is your guardian. It's his job to look after you, and it's your job to do exactly what he says.
Well, that was Amnesty International trying to bring light to the seriousness of the situation. See, in Saudi Arabia, every woman has to have a male guardian. Women need permission to do almost everything: travel, work, go to school, get medical treatment, and talk to the opposite sex. So the actions these women took were incredible, considering how they're challenging the entire Saudi culture and not just a fantasy law. But the state of women is only a microcosm of the larger human rights epidemic taking place in the country. Appallingly enough, Saudi Arabia is only one of only 5 countries in the world that still practices public executions, including beheadings by sword and stoning to death. According to Saudi Arabian law, the following crimes are deserving of death: adultery, armed robbery, blasphemy, burglary, drug possession, engaging in homosexual acts, witchcraft, and sorcery. The methods of execution vary. However, in the great country of Saudi Arabia, after you're killed, you can also be displayed on a giant cross in a public square next to your head for all to see. Although exact numbers are near possible to report because of a government blackout on many of these executions, Amnesty International estimates that at least 79 people were executed in 2012 alone. But it's not just murder for petty crimes of witchcraft or sex that we should be concerned with. See, considering that 15 out of the 19 9/11 hijackers were Saudi, the Saudi government engaged in a sustained assault on its citizens in the wake of the attacks under the guise of fighting terrorism. That sounds familiar. According to a 2009 Amnesty International report, thousands of people have been arrested and detained in virtual secrecy, while others have been killed in uncertain circumstances. Hundreds more people face secret and summary trials and possible execution. Disturbingly, none of the names of these people have been disclosed given the extreme secrecy of the trial process. But we do know that a majority of these prisoners are prisoners of conscience or are simply targeted for criticizing the kingdom. In fact, just today, a Saudi Arabian human rights lawyer was sentenced to 3 months in prison for the mere act of signing a petition critical of the country's judicial system. And it's not just citizens that are being persecuted there. It's millions of foreign workers from Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and elsewhere who are battling this tyrannical theocratic rule. These people basically live in indentured servitude with no limit of work hours and extremely harsh conditions. Physical and sexual abuse is rampant in this industry. And as of January, 45 foreign maids were facing death row, according to Amnesty. So given this horrific track record, why has the U.S. remained such a staunch ally of a criminal theocracy? Well, the U.S. still depends on the Persian Gulf for 13% of its oil usage. Not to mention that this country needs Saudi Arabia in order to carry out its secret drone assassinations in Yemen and Pakistan. See, the CIA's recently revealed drone base there is one of many U.S. military installations scattered across the country. Maybe that's why we haven't tried to democratize Saudi Arabia and liberate its women, just like we did in Iraq, right?
The United States works to help build more hopeful and just societies throughout the world, and in particular the Middle East. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein once used rape rooms to brutalize women and dishonor their families. Today, because we acted, Iraq's women voted in free and democratic elections. They live under a constitution that protects women's rights.
You know, Bush is right in theory. According to Iraq's 2005 constitution, 25% of parliament must be filled by women. But fast forward to today. According to multiple reports, the conditions for women with regards to everything from financial security to legal protections to violence and sex trafficking are worse now than under Saddam's rule. Look, I'm in no means defending Saddam's brutal dictatorship, but the facts speak for themselves. It's clear that the countries that are designated our allies or enemies have absolutely nothing to do with their affinity for democracy or human rights. But as obvious as this hypocrisy is, so many Americans continue to lap up the propaganda and fall into the political trap of manufacturing their consent, hook, line, and sinker. There's a famous lyric by The Clash that goes, "Let me tell you about Wayne and his deals of cocaine. A little more every day until the DEA locked him away." It's a line from the song Jail Guitar Doors, and it was written about the guitarist of the band MC5, Wayne Kramer. His self-described life of crime left him with a 2-year prison sentence. But after he recuperated and rejoined society, he's been working on an outreach program for other prison inmates who need a musical outlet for their frustrations within our two-tiered justice system. Today, Wayne Kramer joins me live to talk about his nonprofit organization, Jail Guitar Doors. Thank you so much for coming on, Wayne.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
So, Wayne, what got you involved in this? Tell me how you got passionate about the issue.
Well, from the time I was released, I'm an archetypal drug war prisoner. I watched as first tens of thousands of people just like me went to prison, then hundreds of thousands, and today millions of our fellow Americans are under lock and key. 2.3 million, 10 million under direct state law enforcement control. And I just felt like this was an international embarrassment and a national disgrace, and that I believe, you know, one person can make a difference, and I think that these kinds of changes happen from the bottom up. And so I got with my fellow musicians, and I joined with the great Billy Bragg, the troubadour from England. He had started doing this work in England, and they were calling it Jail Guitar Doors after the same Clash song. And I said, I'll take this on for the United States. So now, today we're in about 40 prisons in America. We have a waiting list of 50 more.
Wow. And
we have programs in the Cook County Correctional System in Chicago and in Texas and in New York and in Los Angeles where I live.
You know, it's just so incredible because you don't really see art and music programs for prisoners in part of the rehabilitation. What's been the feedback from prisoners? And also talk a little bit about what the program consists of.
Well, the program is simple. What we do is we donate guitars mostly, sometimes some other instruments. And the idea is that if we can get a guitar into a prisoner's hand and task them with writing a song, tell me your story in this song about how you got here. Maybe write a song to your mom, to your daughter, to your son. That process is transformative. It's the beginning of a change of heart that is necessary for the hard work of rehabilitation, because 95% of the people in prison today are going to be released, and they're going to live next door to you and me. So it's in our own interest to help people change for the better while we have them in custody. If we don't help them change for the better, they will most certainly change for the worse.
Why do you say that? Does prison kind of spit you out worse than you were when you went in?
Prison is in its architecture itself, is designed to tell you you are worthless, that you have no value in the world. And the creativity of art, of music, of painting, of acting, of dancing, of writing, all is a great argument against that worthlessness. It's the first step in rebuilding that integrity and self-respect that you lose on your trip to prison.
And how have prisoners been reacting to the program? Have you seen a lot of progress with people, you know, do you visit the prisons back and kind of see these people? Tell me a little bit about the experiences from meeting with some of these people.
There's no downside to it. First, arts and corrections programs are incredibly cheap. We have empirical evidence now through some scholastic studies, longitudinal studies, that prisoners that participate in arts and corrections programming have lower recidivism rates. It also lowers the level of tension on the yard. There's something about when music comes on the yard that everybody kind of chills out a little bit. And in some prisons we've been in have great music programs, but that's the exception to the rule. With the coming of mass incarceration in America, this disgrace of mass incarceration, rehabilitation programs went away. All they could afford was more cells, more guards, more beds. That's it. I think there's a slight shift happening now. I'm seeing a little change, certainly on the state level, the state prison systems, where corrections professionals realize the value of arts and corrections programs, the efficacy of them, the efficiency of them. The federal system, it's another thing, where we get a heavy roadblock at the federal level.
It's a whole other battle. You know, as you're talking about this, you know, art and music having these amazing therapeutic effects and really just a source, a great outlet for people. Why do you think that these programs are the first to be cut, not only, I mean, just in normal everyday things or in prisons, but in education systems across the country? I mean, considering how integral it is to someone's development and mental stability.
Yeah. Hey, I'm with you. It's indefensible. It's suicidal. You know, art is the thing that puts us in touch with our humanity. It's the thing that connects us with each other. And if you take that out, what are we left with? More products to sell?
Exactly. You know, as a former prisoner, what other systemic issues do you see that really need to be dealt with in this prison system? I mean, I know that you said it's really an epidemic. 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prisoners. What's going on here?
Well, like Senator Jim Webb said, there's only two possibilities. Either we're the most evil people in the history of the world, or we're doing something terribly wrong as regarding the administration of justice. You know, this drug war, this 30-year drug war, is the greatest failure of social policy in our country's domestic history. I can go out on any street in America and buy higher quality, cheaper cocaine and heroin today than I could 30 years ago when they locked me up. So this is an abject failure, and it's at this point bipartisan. The right and the left both see it. You know, this was a terrible error in judgment when they passed these mandatory minimum sentences and these severe drug sentences. Half the people in America's prisons are nonviolent drug offenders. They have no business being in prison in the first place. Right. Prison should be the last resort for somebody.
I couldn't agree more. And now we're seeing, of course, the prison industrial complex has turned into a massive industry. We have about 30 seconds left, but talk about how people can get involved, help this organization flourish.
Yes, well, you can go to our site, jailguitardoors.org. You can read everything about what we do there. There's film footage of prison interventions. And you could even make a donation if you wanted to help us. We really see what we do as a kind of a neo-anarchist syndicalist that, you know, we have other musicians in other cities around the country who all do the same work.
Well, let's keep it going, grassroots, bottom up. Thank you so much, Wayne Kramer, co-founder, Jail Guitar Doors. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's going to do it for us tonight, you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you right back here to break the set all over again tomorrow.